Hello, I'm Mike Henriksen from O'Reilly Media, and today I'm going to be talking with John Elspoff from Etsy for our Velocity podcast series. Today's conversation is going to center around DevOps. John, welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Sure. So the first question, and there's been a bit of kerfuffle in the industry about the term DevOps when someone kind of rather recklessly threw around the term NoOps to describe what they thought could be the practice at many large companies. Can you clearly explain what DevOps should be as a discipline?
Sure. I will first say that I really don't think that it's a discipline per se. Much in the same way that software development or operations or systems administration or mechanical engineering, for that matter, it would be considered a discipline. I would just describe it as a way of working. I think that that is development and ops cooperation and collaboration, which is a bit of a clarification in and of itself. That's generally what I think of when I hear the term DevOps is communication, collaboration, cooperation between these two groups that have different but complementary domain expertise. So I would say that that the word DevOps in and of itself is just an indication that there's a skillful and evolved relationship between these two domain expertises. I think that the problem comes in when, especially with the term NoOps, is to not explicitly recognize or explicitly view operations as a separate or complementary domain expertise, or at the very least, but still mistaken, to equate the operations field or operations skills to be only matched up with things like physically racking servers and things that have to do with actions that you might think of as just pure field technician work, and that's certainly not the case. I think that a good example of this is the web operations book that Mike Lukitas roped me into being involved with by O'Reilly. If you look at those 17 or so chapters, there's not much at all about skills or perceptions that you would expect from a repairman, just a regular technical repairman. And I think that to use the word no-ops it's a bit disingenuous, because operations is still going on. All of the things that's involved with what's known as modern web operations is still going on. The titles of the people performing those positions, performing those tasks, and bits of engineering, might be different. They might not have operations in their title, but make no mistake, operations is going on. So, DevOps. I would, argue that it's not that much different between, say, where you would see a finance department and business development working together, or design and development working together, or marketing and product people working together, or even product and design working together. So there's certainly overlapping, certainly complementary. In the worst cases, antagonistic or confrontational, but it certainly doesn't have to be that way. The mark of successful companies are able to take the domain expertise and put them together for good, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Does
So
that answer your question?
absolutely. So one of the things that leads me to though is to think about, DevOps as a profession, or a craft, or whatever we want to call it, a discipline, a craft, a profession. If things go well and run smoothly, you're not going to really see problems. So how do you know if DevOps is working well? Is it because you don't have users complaining, you don't have machines down, you don't have customers complaining? Because isn't it the case where if you have really good DevOps, it's going to be harder to measure and monitor it and improve it?
Well, no, not really. So I would argue that the premise of things going well, or not seeing any problems, means that you have good DevOps. That's actually the case. You can have well, one, you will always see problems. I think that um, uh, uh, I think that having an evolved and business enabling relationship between development and operations doesn't make failure impossible. Um, what I what having I guess what a good, it's really difficult for me to even say the word DevOps actually, without saying development and operations cooperation.
Okay.
It's just not a term that I use. It's a term that I understand, and it's a term that I have a sort of a shared mental model with those people who I know understand what it means. So it's certainly a shorthand. So if I look a bit weird when I say the word DevOps, it's somewhat of an awkward term for me. So I would say that having this good collaboration, skillful, evolved cooperation between these two teams, between these two disciplines, our domain expertise, it means that you are enabling your business to flourish, whatever you're doing, whatever that means for the business. Growth, being able to handle growth, being able to handle failure, all of those things happen. They just happen in a much more mature way. What I think what you're trying to get at is that if you have built a resilient system, a fault-tolerant application, if you are thinking about things like scaling and capacity and response in outage scenarios, and really bulletproofing the business from untoward events, that sort of thing, then you're not going to have the practice that's needed to get better at handling failure, which is true. It's somewhat ironic, if the better you get at staying up, the worse you get at handling it when it goes down. So I would agree with that. You need to have experience, and you need to train for failure in order to develop your ability to respond to it. So on that point, I think that's actually the case. I would really never go so far as to say that that when you have good DevOps, that things would just go smoothly and you won't see any problems. I think it's not a helpful. It may be an idealistic, but concept, but it's not really helpful when it comes to the day-to-day. So most organizations, take advantage of the failures that they do experience and turn them into learning opportunities. The best ones do it quite skillfully, and when failures aren't happening, they'll train for them. They expect failure to happen. They expect surprising events with these complex architectures, complex systems that we build to happen, and then we try to anticipate what we'll do in those circumstances. So if that helps.
Yes, it absolutely does. So you threw out some things there. I tried to mention is lack of downtime or good performance a way to measure good DevOps. But are there other criteria that you use to measure whether an organization is succeeding with their efforts in the development and operations? I mean, is agility, someone's time to react and change, or resiliency, tolerance of failure, efficiency, or are there other measurements that you really look at as the most important criteria?
Yeah, I think that all of those. I think that it would be. So I think all of those that you mentioned. So agility, resiliency, efficiency, shipping. Really, are you shipping product? Are you able to move the business as fast as it needs to, while still making it safe to do so? That, in the end, is I think, if you had to pick one, then it would be that ridiculously vague description. Components of being able to, change the business, evolve the business as fast as it needs to, are those things: agility, resiliency, efficiency. One of the things that I think that is interesting for me personally is to recognize that in each of these endeavors, right? You're going to ship new features. You're going to clean up technical debt. You're going to be able to respond to failures. Is that there's always a spectrum of, and I'm cribbing from Eric Hallnagel right now, but there's a spectrum that exists between being efficient and being thorough. In the end, we have people, and they work with machines. And that relationship between the people and the machines always exists between being thorough and being efficient. Most always, especially on the web, we sacrifice thoroughness for efficiency. When it comes to making changes, when it comes to building architecture, when it comes to writing software, right? This is very well in line with the idea of a minimum viable product, minimum viable infrastructure, a minimum viable software development process. Once you make it explicit, I think, in the organization, especially in development, especially in operations, that everything has this trade-off, this fundamental trade-off. And if you make it explicit between those two teams about where their goals and constraints are, right? The canonical but generally disingenuous view is, development is tasked with shipping code and operations is tasked with, availability. I don't think it's ever that clear cut. It's a useful premise to sort of illustrate the sometimes confrontational pieces of those organizations, but in practice, at least with successful groups, they're not as it's not as binary as that. In the end, I think it's a mix of those things, right? You can have an organization that is, or you can have a product that is extremely resilient to failure, but not agile or not have the ability to change the product very often, right? That's one option. You can have the ability to change the product very rapidly, but at the cost of a huge amount of efficiency. So yeah, you will see that in places where you'll write your software, and because it's deemed premature optimization, you may not have an eye towards performance, because you can eat it by spinning up cloud instances. And so what that is making an explicit trade-off between efficiency and your ability to ship. All trade-offs are trade-offs.
Right.
So I don't know if that helps. Again, I think it's important to realize that there's not just one single axis which these things exist.
Absolutely. It kind of reminds me of years ago, software project management. The four variables being time, cost, quality, and scope. Now we're throwing in agility, resiliency, and efficiency in that mix, and there's a big pool of things you're going to trade off. And one of the things you talked about at our Velocity conference is the use of dashboards and the effective use of dashboards. And can you talk a little bit about what you've seen and what you've got and what people should be looking at and monitoring with their dashboards?
Yeah. I think this is probably one of the most exciting times being in this sort of business. We've got an unprecedented amount of options for gathering metrics. I wouldn't say that gathering metrics at all layers of the of your business. So from the bits on the wire all the way up into the application and business metrics. I don't think that it's widely understood as a good thing to do, but it's certainly getting better. The most important, I think, is being able to raise true anomalies, being able to surface changes that matter. It used to be that getting metrics was the problem. Convincing people you needed metrics was the problem. This, I don't think, is actually that much of a problem anymore. I think that it's pretty clear. Gathering data, and there's entire companies that have business models that depend on the realization that metrics are good things to collect. On the operations front, I think that making sense, right? What human factors people think of as data overload, or what's been considered as data overload, I think are now coming into this field. The same sorts of concerns with designing a cockpit, where you have not only just gauges and counters and screens, but you have knobs and levers and all of the things in order to affect those metrics. I think that those approaches are going to be important, if not mandatory, in the next couple of years, and we see it already. Some of the greatest uses of dashboards that I've seen have been those that somehow order or prioritize one metric over another due to its influence. Either its influence on the upper level, the most top level business metrics like registrations, or like on Etsy's example, checkouts when somebody wants to go buy something. And then on the flip side, surfacing metrics amongst the noise of thousands and thousands of metrics gained, snapshotted every second, to find relationships between metrics, right? Packets per second at the network layer, having pointing to an issue that is statistically significant, but possibly visually non-intuitive at the user registration level, right? For example, so getting the relationship between metrics, I think, is really the challenge. And I don't think that there's one simple, one size fits all. I think that it's I think that the community is still sort of reaching around for the best ways on how to do this.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like a few of our themes and areas are kind of merging together, where data science and analyzing the metrics and the data collected and making sense out of it for your business. Sounds like it's kind of moving into the web performance DevOps space as well. So where do you see velocity, and specifically kind of the Velocity Conference, where do you see that going in the future? Is this going to be something that continues to grow? I mean, we've seen tremendous growth now, but do you think this is still going to continue to grow the way it has been?
I do. I mean, I don't see any end of it. I think, over time, applications on the web have more importance in our daily life, and it's going to become more important. It's to lose it. It's certainly not going to diminish its to social change around the world. So there needs to be, as it becomes more important, there needs to be an encouraging of the skills that are needed to make these things bulletproof. And even in the last, Velocity's at 4 years now. If you were to look at the topics that were discussed at Velocity 4 years ago and the topics that are discussed at Velocity now, I would say they're much more advanced. The community, the field itself, is accelerating its knowledge. There's certainly a dearth of skilled people. I expect that at Velocity later this year in Santa Clara, the job board is going to be filled up. It's at this point, it's almost a foregone conclusion that every company who has representatives at Velocity are going to be hiring. And somebody mentioned this morning that software development is the number one growing field, software engineering, and I would certainly make operations and the Velocity audience as part of that. So I think that it's only going to get more advanced. It's going to get more important.
That's interesting. I just looked at the Velocity attendees list and did some analysis on job titles, and the number one title was engineer without the term software in front of it, and the second one was software engineer. So those were the top two on who's coming to the conference and who finds it valuable. So John, really, I thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in Santa Clara in the end of June. I think it's the 27th or so.
Yep. The 25th through the 28th, actually.
Okay, yeah, good. Well, we'll see you there, and thank you again for your time.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Okay.